My arrogant sister-in-law accused me of stealing at dinner. Her face went pale when the truth unfolded. My name is Chloe, and for 5 years I've lived in the shadow of my husband's family, never quite measuring up to their idea of good enough. But last night at our monthly family dinner, my sister-in-law, Vanessa, went too far. She tried to publicly destroy me, but she had no idea the truth was about to turn her perfect world upside down. It all started with a brooch, a beautiful Art Deco sapphire and diamond piece that belonged to my mother-in-law, Eleanor. It was her most treasured possession, a family heirloom passed down from her own grandmother. She'd often joke, "This old thing? It's barely worth anything." But her eyes would sparkle with a love that said otherwise. We all knew it was priceless. The dinner was at our house this time. I'd spent days cleaning, cooking a roast that practically basted itself, and setting the table with our best china. I was determined to make it perfect. My husband, Mark, kept telling me to relax, that his family would never notice the effort. But I needed them to. I needed just one nod of approval, one genuine thank you from his sister, Vanessa. Vanessa is the kind of woman who enters a room as if she's granting it an audience. She's always perfectly coiffed, dressed in clothes that cost more than my monthly car payment, and she has a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. Her husband, David, is a silent, wealthy man who seems to function as her accessory. They have a son, Leo, a sweet 8-year-old who is the polar opposite of his parents. Everything was going surprisingly well. The food was a hit. Even Vanessa gave a tight, "It's edible, Chloe." I considered it a win. We were moving to the living room for coffee and dessert when Eleanor let out a small gasp. "My brooch," she whispered, her hand fluttering to her chest. "It's gone. I left it on my dressing table this morning." I was sure of it. A quiet panic settled over the room. We all helped her search her room, the bathroom, the hallway. Nothing. Vanessa stood in the center of the living room, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Well, it didn't just grow legs and walk away, did it? Her eyes scanned the room and then landed squarely on me. "Chloe, you were the only one in Mother's room earlier. I saw you coming out before dinner." I froze, a tray of empty coffee cups trembling in my hands. "I was just putting away her coat," I stammered. "I didn't even see the brooch." "Is that so?" Vanessa purred, stepping closer. "It's just, we all know how much you admire it. And let's be honest, your background doesn't exactly lend itself to owning such fine things." The air left my lungs. She was referring to the fact that I grew up in a working-class family, that I put myself through college while she and Mark had everything handed to them. Mark stood up, his face dark. "Vanessa, that's enough." "Is it?" She fired back, her voice rising for the whole family to hear. "I think we should check her purse. Right now. For Mother's sake." Tears of humiliation welled in my eyes. I looked at Mark, at Eleanor, at my father-in-law. No one moved to defend me. Their silence was a verdict. Feeling like I was in a nightmare, I walked into the hallway, retrieved my handbag from the closet, and handed it to Vanessa. My hands shaking. She made a show of it, opening the clasp slowly, a look of smug certainty on her face. She reached in, and her expression faltered for a second. Then her fingers closed around something. She pulled her hand out, and there, glinting in the soft living room light, was the sapphire brooch. A collective gasp went through the room. "I knew it," Vanessa hissed, triumph blazing in her eyes. "You little thief!" I felt the world drop out from under me. "I didn't. I swear I didn't. Someone must have put it there." "Oh, please," Vanessa scoffed, holding the brooch aloft like a trophy. "Mark, are you going to let your wife get away with this? Stealing from your own family?" Mark looked at me, a storm of confusion and disappointment in his eyes. It was the look I'd always feared most. But in that moment of utter despair, I remembered something. My phone. I'd been filming a silly, time-lapse video of the sunset from the kitchen window earlier, and I'd left the phone propped on the bookshelf recording to get a wide shot of the room filling with people. I'd completely forgotten to stop it. "Wait," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "My phone. It's been recording on the bookshelf since before everyone arrived." Vanessa's smirk didn't fade. "And? So it recorded you being a thief?" "No," I said, walking over to the shelf and picking up my phone. It recorded whoever went into this room. I opened the video app. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I fast-forwarded, the family gathering in silent, anxious anticipation. And then I saw it. I stopped the video and hit play. The footage was clear. About 20 minutes before dinner, while I was finishing the gravy in the kitchen, a figure slipped into the living room. It was Leo, Vanessa's son. He looked around furtively, then took the brooch from his pocket. He tiptoed to the hallway and after a moment returned without it. He had planted it in my bag. A dead silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to Leo, who had started to cry quietly. "Leo?" Eleanor asked softly. "Why, sweetheart?" Through his sobs, the story tumbled out. "Mommy said it was a game. She said we had to teach Aunt Chloe a lesson for being so common. She said if we planted it, Grandma would see she wasn't a good person and Uncle Mark would send her away. She gave me $100 to do it." The color drained from Vanessa's face. She went from arrogant to ashen in a second, her perfectly applied blush standing in stark contrast to her sudden pallor. "He's lying. He's a confused child," she shrieked, but the evidence was right there in high definition on my screen. David, her usually silent husband, stood up. He looked at his wife, not with anger, but with a deep, weary disgust. $100, Vanessa? To frame an innocent woman? To use our son as a prop in your petty, vicious games? The family, who had been ready to crucify me moments before, now turned their fury on Vanessa. The accusations flew. Mark was the loudest, his voice shaking with rage as he told his sister to get out of our house and never come back. But I just stood there, watching the chaos. The validation was sweet, but it was hollow. The damage was done. They had all been so quick to believe the worst of me. As Vanessa was hustled out by a fuming David, weeping now not from shame but from being caught, she shot me one last venomous look. I knew then this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of the unraveling. The facade of the perfect family had cracked, and I was finally seeing what was underneath. And for those of you who think the story ends with her walking out the door, think again. This was only the first act. The fallout from that night was more explosive than I could have ever imagined. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next update. Tapping the notification bell is the only way you'll see what happened when the dust settled. First update. The fallout. The silence after the front door slammed shut was heavier than any accusation. My living room, once filled with the clatter of dinner and then the thunder of scandal, was now a tomb. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, was the first to move. She walked over to me, her hands trembling as she took mine. "Chloe, my dear girl, I am so sorry. I should never have doubted you." Her eyes were brimming with tears, but for the first time, they weren't for a lost brooch, but for the pain she had allowed to be inflicted on me. My father-in-law, Robert, a man of few words, simply placed a hand on my shoulder and gave it a firm squeeze. His head bowed in shame. But it was Mark's reaction that broke me. He pulled me into a crushing hug, his body shaking. "I'm sorry, Chloe. I saw the brooch and my brain short-circuited. I failed you. I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you." The immediate apologies were a balm, but the wound was deep. The video on my phone had saved me, but it had also exposed a rot within the family that went far deeper than one spoiled sister-in-law. We didn't talk much that night. There was too much to process. The next morning, the digital storm began. A cousin who had been at the dinner, outraged by what happened, had posted a vague but incendiary story on Facebook about witnessing pure evil at a family dinner and the strength of the victim. It didn't take long for the family grapevine to do its work. Phone calls, texts, and messages flooded our phones. The story was out, and Vanessa was at the center of the hurricane. I, however, stayed silent. I didn't post anything. I let the truth do its own work. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was David, Vanessa's husband. His voice sounded hollow, stripped of all its usual polished confidence. "Chloe," he said, "I need to see you. There are things you need to know. Can I come over?" Mark was hesitant, protective, but I agreed. I needed to understand the why. David arrived looking like he hadn't slept in a week. He sat at our kitchen table, the same table where Vanessa had orchestrated my humiliation, and he confessed everything. "It wasn't just about you," he began, staring into a mug of coffee I'd given him. "This is who she is. It's a sickness. She's been embezzling from my business for years. Small amounts at first, then larger. I only found the full extent of it last month. I confronted her, told her she needed to get help or I would file for divorce and press charges." He looked up, his eyes desperate. I think framing you was a desperate power play. If she could make you the villain, discredit you in the family's eyes, she could control the narrative. If I divorced her, she could tell everyone it was because you were a bad influence, that you turned me against her. Anything but the truth. She was building her defense. Mark and I were speechless. The dinner wasn't just a petty act of jealousy. It was a strategic move in a much larger, more terrifying game. And Leo, David's voice broke. Using our son like that. That was the final line. I filed for divorce. Full custody. I have the financial records, and now I have the video of her manipulating him. She won't get near him. He slid a manila envelope across the table. These are copies of the financial records. I thought you should have them. You were collateral damage in a war you didn't even know was being waged. After he left, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Vanessa was cornered, financially exposed, and facing the loss of her son and lifestyle. A woman like that doesn't just fade away quietly. The plot, as they say, was about to thicken. Her next move was something I never could have predicted, and it would threaten everything I had built. The story was far from over, and the next chapter was the most shocking of all. If you think the dinner was dramatic, you haven't seen anything yet. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next update. Final update. Reckoning a week of tense quiet passed. The divorce papers had been served, and Vanessa had been temporarily denied access to Leo pending a psychological evaluation. We thought, perhaps naively, that the legal system would now handle things. We were wrong. Vanessa's response was not one of surrender, but of escalation. She began a smear campaign. She started calling family members, spinning a wild tale about how I was having an affair with David, that we had conspired to frame her to take her son and her money. It was ludicrous, but poison, when dripped consistently, can start to stain. Then she showed up at my workplace. I'm a graphic designer, and I work in a quiet, open-plan office. She marched in, her eyes wild, and started screaming at me in front of my colleagues, calling me a homewrecker and a manipulator. Security had to escort her out, but the damage was done. My professional reputation was suddenly under attack. I knew then I couldn't just be a passive victim anymore. David had given me the weapons. It was time to use them. With Mark and David's full support, we decided to fight fire with truth. We called for a family meeting. Not a dinner, but a sit-down in my father-in-law's study. Everyone who was at the dinner was there, along with a few other key family members. The air was thick with anticipation. I stood up, my knees weak but my resolve steeled. I didn't have a video this time, just a folder of documents and the truth. "Vanessa has been telling you all lies," I began, my voice clear. "And I'm here to set the record straight. This wasn't about a brooch. It was about this." I held up the financial records David had given me. For years, Vanessa has been stealing from her husband's company. Over $200,000. When David confronted her and threatened divorce, she panicked. She needed a scapegoat. She needed to make me the family villain so that when David left her, she could point at me and say, "She's the reason my life fell apart." She used her own child as a pawn in that game. I passed around copies of the most damning financial documents. I watched as the faces around the room changed from skepticism to shock, and then to anger. The evidence was undeniable. Transfers to her secret accounts, purchases for luxury items that didn't exist in their shared life. Then, Mark played the audio recording from my phone of her confrontation at my office, her voice shrill and unhinged. The final nail in the coffin was a text message exchange David provided, where Vanessa admitted to a friend that she had to take Chloe down a peg because she was too comfortable in our family. The room erupted, but not at me. This time, the full force of the family's fury was directed squarely at Vanessa. They saw the full picture now. Not just a mean-spirited prank, but a calculated, pathological campaign of destruction. Eleanor stood up, her face a mask of grim determination. "That's enough," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Vanessa is no longer welcome in this family. We will support David and Leo fully. And Chloe," she said, turning to me, her eyes filled with a new, profound respect. "We owe you more than an apology. We owe you our loyalty." That was the true turning point. The family, once a source of my anxiety, closed ranks around me. They cut Vanessa off completely. No calls, no money, no support. The legal proceedings were brutal and swift. With the combined testimony of the family, the video evidence, the financial records, and her public meltdowns, Vanessa had no leg to stand on. David was granted full custody, and she was ordered to pay restitution for the embezzled funds, which she could only do by selling her lavish possessions. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to another state, alone and disgraced. The empire of image she had spent her life building had crumbled to dust, brought down not by a grand enemy but by her own limitless arrogance. As for me, I found my voice. The quiet, people-pleasing Chloe was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth. My relationship with Mark grew stronger through the fire. And my in-laws? They now treat me not as an outsider, but as the daughter they always should have seen. We have real dinners now, filled with laughter that isn't forced and compliments that are genuinely meant. The brooch sits in a safety deposit box. Eleanor says she wants me to have it one day, but I don't need a jewel to remind me of my value. I earned that in that living room, when I stopped being the accused and became the one who brought the truth to light. This is the end of this story, but the beginning of a much happier chapter for me. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, be sure to like, leave a comment about what you thought of Vanessa's downfall, and subscribe for more real-life stories of karma in action. Tap that notification bell so you never miss a video.